Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight. This is the Local Energy Advocates of Western Mass, and tonight we're hosting Solomon Goldstein-Rose, and he will be talking about geothermal produced electricity. Solomon has been a state rep from Amherst and has written a book, 100% Solutions, and is now the founder and CEO for Renew Systems, which you'll probably hear more about in his talk. So welcome, Solomon. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. Hi, everyone. Shall I jump in?
You don't get to claim him more than that?
This is an official event. Yeah.
Okay. So when I say geothermal, you probably think ground source heat pumps, especially because I know one of your recent presentations here was also about geothermal HVAC, district, geothermal heating, all of that. That's great. That is no relation to what I'm talking about today. I'm talking about geothermal electricity generation. About a quarter of climate change is because of fossil power plants, coal, and mostly coal, a lot of methane power plants. And that is the single biggest chunk of emissions, the single most urgent thing we need to decarbonize. And New England currently doesn't have what I would call any kind of real plan for how we're going to actually clean our grid or how we're going to contribute to the world cleaning its grids in general. And so I'm going to start with just like why I'm interested in the idea of new kinds of geothermal electricity generation in New England, and then get into what this new kind of geothermal looks like physically and how we do it. And I'll answer whatever questions you have, which I'm sure will be many. So starting off, New England is particularly unblessed in terms of electricity generation sources. There are places like Northwest Australia where there's so much sun and so much wind blowing, and you can get a really high capacity factor of solar and wind combined. Capacity factor is the percent of the rated power that actually gets produced over the course of a year. So here, we really don't. So just starting right off, the first thing you probably think of when I talk about clean electricity in New England is solar. It's the most local. We have it on our roofs. It's all around in our communities. The problem is New England is a reasonably dark place on the scale of the Earth. We don't get a lot of sun. The capacity factor for solar around here is something like 11%. So any amount of land that we take up with solar, only about 11% of that is actually valuable over the course of the year. If we do it on rooftops, that doesn't take up land, but it's 4 times as expensive. And so then it's not an economical solution for replacing methane power plants on the grid. So we can do some solar. We have done some. We can do
I'm
more.
sorry to interrupt. Paul, could you,
Sorry.
and others, could you mute?
No worries. So, we're doing some solar, but it's not a real resource that we are blessed with in New England. And I know that also a lot of local energy advocates are really concerned about the clear cutting of forests associated with solar development in our region. And so that really is a land use issue. Solar is land intensive per actual output of electricity generation. So what clean electricity do we have in New England? Right now, mostly what we have is nuclear. There are still 2 nuclear plants in New England, in New Hampshire and in Connecticut, that produce, last I checked, about 20% of all of our electricity and the vast majority of our clean electricity. But there are so many political issues with nuclear, even the newer kinds of nuclear, that I'm not going to get into any of that. But I would bet some people in this room would be hesitant about this, for which very reason I don't see nuclear in New England as being scalable in the really near term. And so that's something we could do in theory, but we also don't have the sole choice of that. It's up to federal regulation and local permitting and all of that. What else do we have? We've got Canadian hydro, and we import this. And the issue with this is that anytime we want to import more of it, that also involves clear cutting a huge path through the forests of New Hampshire and the White Mountains to build new transmission lines to bring significant new amounts of it. It also has its own land use issues in Canada. So there's some amount of more we could do of Canadian hydro, but not at the scale of replacing all of the methane power plants that are polluting the air in New England right now. And then there's offshore wind. And this is the one resource that we really have in New England. We've got a lot of wind potential offshore, and we really should be building tons and tons of offshore wind. Even though it is intermittent, like solar and like onshore wind, it is more reliable. It's a little more predictable, and you could get capacity factors of 40, 50%, even a little more in some places. And so you don't need such a crazy amount of energy storage to pair with that. That should be a big part of our grid. So far, projects are being canceled. Projects are not moving forward. We're not getting the bids we expect. It's really expensive because haven't been managing it very well in terms of how we incentivize it and mandate it at the state level, but also because it's very hard to put that much steel in safe configurations out in the deep water. That's a big infrastructure project, and we're not yet scaled up with any industry to do that in the US. So that's an option. That could be a big piece of our grid still, but that also might inherently be more expensive, by maybe significantly more expensive than our current electricity. So then this gets me wondering, what about geothermal power plants? Here is a 100-some megawatt geothermal power plant in Indonesia. You'll notice that it did involve some clear cutting of forest here. Just for a little frame of reference, the same rated capacity of solar would take up about 15 times as much space, maybe more. So in terms of land use, we're a lot more efficient with a geothermal power plant. And that's rated capacity. And then the solar capacity factor here would be 11%. The geothermal capacity factor could be 90% because it can produce all the time. The capacity factor of geothermal, nuclear, and fossil plants are all just determined by how much you want of it, what the grid needs, because you can run it at full power all the time. Some features to note: geothermal plants consist of some buildings, some pipes, a bunch of fans, because this is an air-cooled plant, as probably most, if not all, of the new ones would be, as opposed to having steam cooling towers. And it fits in a relatively small land area next to a community. So why don't we have this already as a major part of New England power? So far, geothermal has been developed in places like Iceland, which is pictured here, which, as you can see here, there is literally steam coming out of the ground. So we know that it is really hot. Not only is that the rock is really hot, but that there is already water in that hot rock, and that there are already natural fractures in that hot rock that form a reservoir of water in contact with rock. So this is what traditional geothermal looks like. You look for steam coming out of the ground: Iceland, bits of the Pacific Northwest, Indonesia, Philippines, bit of Italy. You drill a well pretty shallow, like less than 1 up to maybe 3 kilometers at most. Not at all as shallow as ground source heat pumps, geothermal HVAC. This is still deeper. We're talking 1 to 3 kilometers, but you'll see this is shallow. You drill a shallow well, you take the steam that's naturally occurring there, you run it through some turbines, you inject the water back to maintain pressure in the reservoir. This rock is naturally fractured. It is already filled with steam. This doesn't exist in most places on Earth, and therefore geothermal is a very tiny percent of all electricity generation in the world today. But people have started to think, well, anywhere you go on Earth, the rock is hot at a certain depth. If we go even a relatively tiny way through the crust, the rock is hot enough to have supercritical steam anywhere below our feet. We just have to get to it and extract the heat somehow. And so the whole realm of enhanced geothermal systems is basically, okay, let's drill a well however far we need to go to get the required heat, which will vary from 2 to 20 kilometers. Make our own fractures if it's not already naturally fractured rock. And the different configurations of this I'll talk about in a moment. Inject cold water, get up hot water. And we can do this anywhere. Everywhere below our feet, there is rock. If we go deep enough, it is hot. We know that we can extract that heat by getting enough surface area in contact between rock and water, and we can get hot water to the surface and we can run turbines. It's 24/7, no emissions. We can do it anywhere. A wonderful climate solution, but it has its challenges in getting off the ground. So there are a bunch of startups now that are trying to commercialize new kinds of geothermal, and most of the startups have different designs for what this reservoir looks like. If we're creating our own reservoir rather than tapping into a natural reservoir, we get to a certain depth to achieve the temperature we want, and then we create some fractures. So what's pictured here is 2 wells, each with a long lateral horizontal section, and then you create a bunch of fractures to connect the 2 of them. And they literally look kind of like this. They're represented as these wavy things because, of course, it's imperfect. But this is an actual picture of a very small actual fracture that was created. There's the well bore, and this rock has been split in half, so you can see what it looks like. It's a circle. The rock is like, it's a tiny crack in the rock. These things are very two-dimensional, and they might be a centimeter in width and hundreds of feet in length and height. In this case, in length mostly, to get the connection between the 2 wells. If you wanted to do this at scale, it might look something like this. You drill a bunch of wells on a pad and you connect all of them and you inject down one and produce up the other, and you get your hot water. This is all to get surface area in contact with rock. There are other designs. This one has been built already. There is a power plant in the US operating with this new technology. This one has been built. There is an energy storage plant operating in the US with this technology, not yet a deeper version that would be getting hot water, just they're storing energy and getting it back. But this one is a company I used to work with closely, where the fractures aren't connected to anything. They're downward oriented. It's literally you're pumping mud to crack apart the rock, no toxic chemicals. You pump a heavy mud, the rock cracks more at the bottom because it's heavy, and so the pressure is highest at the bottom, and so you get even deeper rock here. And each of these just acts like a lung, and you store a bunch of water in it, and then you add a little more water, increasing the pressure against the rock. And then when you want the water back, the rock will push it back up for you because you've stored a lot of pressure and the rock wants to close the fracture. So these ones, you're going in and then waiting for it to heat up and then going out and putting it in the other well. And these are just alternating every day. And because most of the water stays there most of the time, there's hot water available immediately. So the only downtime is when you're actually changing direction. There are designs that don't involve any kind of fractures. They involve really, really long horizontal sections. And actually, sometimes these are made into like complex radiator shapes. These are also being built, but they are so expensive because you need so much well bore to get the same surface area in contact with rock. This is all about harvesting heat. So we need surface area in contact with rock. Rock in itself is not a good conductor of heat. So we need a lot of surface area of the water or of the well casing with water in it to harvest that heat from the rock. And so we're talking many, many, many kilometers of horizontal sections if we're doing this. But this is the picture is there's a pipe inside the pipe. And on the outside, the cold water goes down, it gets hot, and then it comes back in the inner pipe and goes up to the surface. So that is also an option, but an expensive one. On the surface, what does it look like? We saw one, here's a schematic of an organic Rankine cycle turbine. So traditional geothermal often used the steam directly in steam turbines. The temperatures that we're usually targeting, at least in the first years of new geothermal, are 200 to 250 Celsius, which is not hot enough to be that useful in a steam turbine. So we use an organic Rankine cycle turbine, which works just like a steam turbine, but it's a different fluid, not water, in a closed loop that gets heated by a heat exchanger. So the subsurface water comes up, heats the organic Rankine cycle, and the subsurface water goes right back down. The turbine system is a closed loop. The well system is, we don't call it a closed loop. This gets called closed loop because it's not in contact with the rock directly. It's only in contact with the well casing. But it's just a loop underground and a loop on the surface. And this is what it looks like: a bunch of pipes, a bunch of fans. Yes, it uses some land, but way less than other options that are at all clean. When we are drilling, this is what it looks like. There's a drilling rig. You prepare a site. This might be something like 5 or 7 acres. Get it all really level, bring a bunch of pipes, stack them up, and the well is here, and these pipes are being screwed together as you go to form the well casing. There is a pond here for water that might be involved in many of these geothermal designs, where you're pumping water in and storing that in the fractures, and then sometimes storing it on surface when you need extra power. One of the advantages of geothermal is we can do peaking power, we can do storage, it can be flexible. It's not just baseload generation. Because I know someone's going to ask, what about groundwater? We're way, way deeper than groundwater. The wells are cased all the way along. This is how oil and gas wells are drilled. You go a little bit just to establish the shape of the well, and then you go in with a narrower drill bit and drill a ways down to get through all the groundwater, and then you put steel casing in to seal off the well from the rock and the aquifers or whatever is there. And then you go in with a narrower bit and you go a lot deeper, and then you cement, case and cement the steel in place as you need to there, and then you go in with a narrow bit, so it telescopes. This is one reason that geothermal is a little more expensive than other oil and gas wells, because we have to go deeper and we need a wider diameter for the flow rate of moving that heat. Mass flow rate equals heat flow rate equals energy flow rate. And so the telescoping in an oil and gas well might get down to like a couple inches final tube, and we need like 7, 9 some inches final tube. So they're big wells, but we're going to be using existing oil and gas drilling rigs and drilling providers with their standard casing sizes and everything, which I think is really cool, especially from a US political perspective. We are re-employing fossil fuel workers in their current jobs. So that's enhanced geothermal, and it is being done in Nevada. It's being done in Utah. Projects are being developed in Texas and Louisiana and New Mexico. These parts of the US have relatively hot rock. Like, you only have to go 2 or 3 kilometers in Utah to get the temperatures I'm talking about. You go maybe 5 kilometers in Texas to get the temperatures that I'm talking about. In New England, you go 10 kilometers, maybe 9. So this is not the low-hanging fruit for this industry, which is why I think, currently the only person talking about doing enhanced geothermal power plants in Massachusetts. But the thing is that we don't have a lot of other great options, and certainly not other options that are really scalable for actually local, actually clean power. And the cool thing about geothermal is it can be as local as we want it. We need 5 acres minimum to go on a site and have the drilling pad, and maybe 10 acres to do a significant scale of power plant. But we could have little power plants and medium and big power plants all over New England where we want them on appropriate sites, and avoid the need for new grid transmission as much as possible, certainly compared to something like offshore wind or Canadian hydro. We can have local energy aggregations owning power, which a lot of towns around us have, and have the ability to own generation as well as to retail the power. We could be contracting for power purchase agreements for geothermal, or actually hosting and owning the generation. So I envision this becoming, out of necessity, a significant part of New England's electricity generation. Even though we're not the low-hanging fruit for this new industry, we might need to be a leader in getting the deeper drilling proven and scaled to make enhanced geothermal work in places like New England, because most of the world looks more like New England from a geology perspective than it looks like Texas. And so to make geothermal scalable for the whole world as a climate solution, we need that leadership. And places like Texas that can already do it with totally off-the-shelf technologies, they're not going to take that leadership. So maybe we have to. I think I said pretty much everything as I went, but geothermal is 24/7 renewable. It's flexible. It can be ramped up for peaking power. It can act literally as storage because you can store extra pressure in the reservoir and then get that back later. It's as local as we want it. It's also as scalable to large scale as we want it, and much more efficient than other renewable options in terms of land use. And that's my email if anyone wants to get in touch. Questions?
Thank you, Solomon. Yes, so now we'll take questions. And if you want to take the slides down, if people want to refer to a slide, you can put them back up, but let's see each other.
Yeah.
So,
Tom?
yeah.
Evocative technology here. You're taking the drill baby drill to a new direction here. But I'm wondering sort of, well, a lot of things, but are there other cost drivers than just the depth of the well? I mean, if you run into different geological formations, say even locally differences, is that a big driver? You're using existing well drilling technology is said, but what are the economic drivers here?
Yeah. So the main one in terms of the cost of the well is depth, because every time a drill bit wears out and you need to replace it or anything goes wrong and you need to access the bottom hole assembly that's actually doing the drilling, you need to pull the whole thing out of the well, which the weight on that drill bit is coming from a steel tube, however many kilometers long, that you've screwed together in 90-foot sections. So you need to pull it out, unscrew, lay down the section, pull it out, unscrew, lay down the section, change the bit or whatever, and then put it back in, screw in each section, put it down, screw in each section, put it down. And that can take a day to trip out and in, it's called. And when you're paying by the day for like 10, 20 some $1,000s for each component of the drilling rig per day, that gets very expensive. So that's why it gets exponentially more expensive the deeper you go, because if you're at 5 kilometers, it might take a day. If you're at 9 kilometers, it might take 2 days to do a trip. That's one key thing. The second one is definitely the rock type. So oil and gas drilling is optimized for sedimentary rock because that's where oil and gas are. And Texas has hot sedimentary rock, so that's very exciting. 5 kilometers, oil and gas does that already a lot. 200 plus Celsius, sedimentary rock all the way, dream. Here, it's hard rock pretty much all the way. Actually, right here in the Connecticut River Valley, there's some significant sedimentary rock for the first part, but then by the depth we need, much more than half of the drilling would be in hard rock. In Utah, where that plant that I mentioned had been built, that's in hard rock, not as deep, but the experiments that have been done and DOE funded experiments have been a lot about how do we adapt oil and gas drilling technologies to drill in hard rock. And that's been going really, really well. Like they're getting it to be just about as cheap in some cases to go in hard rock as to go in sedimentary rock. So that's one that actually just using the right drill bits and having the teams have the expertise and getting good at doing that, it seems to be working very well, and will probably make it not much more expensive to go in hard rock than sedimentary rock. So that problem kind of solved, but it gets more of an issue when you get deeper. The pressures get much higher. The diameter that you need to start with in order to get a significant diameter that deep, all go up. So there are a slew of startups that are not the reservoir design, but the drilling technology. There's an MIT spinout that has a millimeter wave drilling that would like vaporize the rock. They have very ambitious talking points about super cheap electricity, super deep, going 20 kilometers, all that. Don't know how real that's going to be, how soon, but very excited for their potential. There's one that's plasma-based drilling. They are targeting 10 kilometers or so. There are some other ones that have designs for ways to more cheaply go through particularly like hard, deep rock. And there are some hybrid models too, where if you soften up the rock with some plasma, then your drill bit doesn't wear out as often, and so then you don't have that issue as much of having to go all the way back out and in.
Hey,
Thank you.
Steve.
Solomon, a great talk, and your book was also wonderful. Couple of questions, maybe quite a few. One, why do you need the fans? They're a prominent part of the production facility you showed.
Yeah.
What's the cost of drilling a 9-10 kilometer hole in Massachusetts? When do you think that that a 9-kilometer hole might get started?
Okay,
And
you can
another,
ask more questions, but I'm going to answer those three while I remember them.
okay,
Answer more after. The cost of a really deep well in Massachusetts with existing oil and gas drilling might be something like $30-40 million. And that's an unknown. In Texas, going 5.5 kilometers, the drilling itself might be 10 million or a little less. So that's kind of their sense of the exponential increase. How soon? One issue is we don't have any oil and gas resources in New England, so we don't have any regulatory regime for drilling wells of this depth. And so there needs to be a conversation of like, how do we license these things? What different agencies or town entities are involved in permitting something like this? What are the subsurface rights if we want to have a horizontal section of well bore? Do we need your permission as a landowner if we're below you, if we're 9 kilometers below you? In the UK, if you're at least from one place that I saw, I don't know if this is universal there, if you were below 3 kilometers, you didn't have to interface with the surface owners because there's just no impact. So there are some issues in terms of like, how do we go about permitting? That's solvable. That's just, it'll take some doing. The cost, I think, is the main deterrent to doing a project right now. A lot of people say, wait till it gets cheaper from doing it elsewhere to do it here, which makes a lot of sense if you're the new geothermal industry. It doesn't make as much sense if you're New England wanting to actually, or people in New England who want to actually have a clean grid. So in theory, like, we could do this in a few months. If we were permitted to go drill a well, like, you can get a rig, there are a lot available at the moment, and you can drill a well in a few months. If we were going this deep, it might be half a year, but probably less. So it's really driven by customers signing on for power purchase agreements, the regulations just kind of being set up to do it, and most of all, just having funders saying like, yeah, I'll pay 40 million for you to go try this, even though it's first of a kind. And even if you have an offtake contract, we're not 100% certain what the economic return on this might be. Okay, now see, I've already forgotten your first question. Remind me.
the fans.
Oh yeah, so the organic Rankine cycle, any turbine cycle, you heat the fluid, you put it through the turbine, you cool the fluid, and then you compress it again. That's a steam turbine, and that's an organic Rankine cycle too. So in the cooling the fluid stage, either you cool it with river water or seawater, and that water gets evaporated in a cooling tower, or you cool it with air cooling, which is basically like a refrigerator system of some sort, which has the fans to get the kind of same deal in the rock, like that's the surface area of the flow of air in the chillers. So that's what the fans are.
One last, the Marcellus whatever shale or whatever you call it, at one point was being considered as a source of uranium.
Hmm.
And some of the talk about fracking is that the people who are carrying the crap away were being exposed to radiation. Is that ever brought up as any sort of an issue?
No. So the drilling, you're removing some rock from the ground. The fracking, you're not actually removing anything. You're just cracking the rocks. You're gonna pump fluid in to crack and hold the rock open. Maybe you pump a mud in, then you switch that for water. So no.
Thanks.
Roy?
Yeah, wonder if you could, very interesting talk, learning a lot here. Wonder if you could talk about the costs, both on a upfront cost per megawatt and then on a lifetime cost LCOE per megawatt hour. And also squeezing in a second question here about the lifetime of the well, both in terms of the heat producing capacity of the fracture zone and the lifetime of the uh, the shaft, the hole, and all the seals in it. Uh, I just wondered, do we have to worry about, 50 years from now, stuff leaking into the groundwater and causing problems? So cost and lifetime. Thank you.
Yeah. The oldest geothermal plant in the world is over 100 years old. So these things can last a long time. I will also say that routine maintenance in geothermal plants sometimes includes, with traditional geothermal, drilling new wells because your existing ones are underperforming. And so you need to kind of maintain the pressure in the reservoir better or whatever. That should, in theory, be less of an issue when we're creating our own reservoir in a more defined way. So the costs depend a lot on where you are. So in a project in Texas, for first of a kind project, we might be in the 6 to 8 so cents per kilowatt hour range for the wholesale price. In New England, we're probably closer to 15 cents per kilowatt hour for the wholesale price, in which case we're really talking about what are the contexts where we can compete with the retail price by being behind the meter or selling directly to an aggregation or to a university. This would make a lot of sense for UMass, for example, which needs both the electricity and the heat. They need steam to run their heating system. They had a plan to convert the whole heating system to hot water instead of steam, which would have been a $1 to $2 billion project to do that conversion and do ground source heat pumps to power it. They don't have that money, so that's not happening. They don't have an alternate plan at the moment. So this would make a lot of sense for places like that combined heat and power plant replacement. So that's first of a kind on the order. And a 10 megawatt plant might cost $100 million total for a couple wells in the top side. And it gets much more economical if you're doing not 10 megawatts, but 100 megawatts, and you have a pad of wells in a place. In our mini area, there are few, if any, places that would be appropriate to have that much acreage in one spot, but there are places in New England that would be. Those were questions. I think about half the cost is the drilling, and about half the cost is the turbines and et cetera on the surface. Yeah, sure, or 2/3, 1/3. Darcy.
Did you say 100 million for a plant?
It depends on the size of the plant. Roughly the smallest that it makes sense to go is about 10 megawatts, 5 to 10 megawatts minimum. That's like one well pair. And that first of a kind in New England, with my conservative assumptions of the drilling cost, something like 100, even 120 million.
That's the cost of our new elementary school in Amherst, FYI.
Well, we could power a lot of Amherst's maybe all of Amherst's electricity.
Yeah, so I do have a couple questions. One is, has there been any use of like former fracking wells to do this? And also because of the fact that the technology involves cracking, does it like risk having earthquakes or tremors or anything caused by those cracks?
Yes. Okay. First question. Reusing old oil and gas wells everyone talks about it. What I said about the diameter of an oil and gas well being a few inches versus we need a lot of diameter if you have a very small diameter and you're trying to have a high flow rate, you have a lot of friction losses and it just becomes uneconomic. You have to pump so much at the surface to make up for the friction going up that small diameter. So no, some people think that they might, for the energy storage version of this, where you're just like storing pressure in the fractures and then harvesting that pressure in like a water turbine, like a pumped hydro system. That might work in old wells, although no one is doing that to my knowledge either. But you need the larger diameter basically. There are probably a few, but not generally. Induced seismicity, yes. So when it's not even necessarily the fracturing that can be part of it. It can also be the drilling or just the injection of water at any time in any oil and gas or geothermal operation can create mini earthquakes. Occasionally, an oil and gas or a geothermal operation has created earthquakes that are detectable, almost never that are at all harmful level. But yeah, they monitor for that. And that is something that is being, adapted. Oil and gas has gotten very good at not doing that in sedimentary rock. You have to monitor and adapt for doing that in hard rock. In the project in Utah that they've done a bunch of wells, they had some little things kind of continuously. It never got above the threshold that they were like monitoring for and would have paused operations for. So it's definitely something that will happen. Almost certainly not something that will be an issue for anyone. But yeah, that's going to be a point of conversation. Susan.
I apologize if I missed this, if you said something about it already, but I was wondering how this idea of a large scale plant like this compares to the residential geothermal systems in terms of like, if you have a bunch of people putting in those residential. I mean, I've heard some people talk about wanting to do geothermal and being told that the bedrock or whatever's underneath isn't appropriate and they get blocked from doing it. But I do know some, bunch of people who have done this. And so, like, what's the balance of doing this in a large scale like this to serve a larger region versus a bunch of individual residents doing it themselves?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I think I started before everyone was on with my comment up front. This is no relation to geothermal heating, geothermal HVAC.
No, I'm not talking about
ground source heat pumps, any of that, which would be talked about at the residential scale. You can't do geothermal electricity generation at the scale of a house. In theory, if your house had 3 acres minimum, you could drill a well there, and you could drill, a couple wells really deep. But it would be, if you actually did it in a way that was whatsoever economical, it would be far beyond the capacity of your house. A house might use 3 to 5 kilowatts, and I'm saying 10 megawatts is the minimum of one well pair in any economical form. There is the possibility of having a bunch of small sites in the region that are each 5 acres or 10 acres, and you bring a drilling rig and you do one and then you do the next and you do the next, and that would definitely save money on the drilling side because you're not having to move the rig in anew each time. And so you don't necessarily need like a 50-acre site all together.
I guess I was confused about your that comment. I did hear you say that, but there's the kind of district heating that's geothermal. That's what I thought you were differentiating it from. I'm talking about ground source heat pumps where they are generating electricity for the home, right?
No, ground source
using heat pumps.
Ground source heat pumps use electricity to generate the heating or cooling, just like a refrigerator, but instead of heating or cooling the air outside the refrigerator, it heats or cools the rock, which is at a more consistent temperature, so it's more efficient than air source heat pumps. Eric.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, very thought-provoking. Who are the people, or are there people? In classic energy terms, it would be oil and gas exploration companies, but who understand the underground geology well enough to maybe find optimal um, places that don't require 9 or 10, that are the Appalachians are older, so maybe there aren't any places where the crust is, where we get down to energy laden rock, in terms of amount of BTUs. So has there been underground mapping that
Yes.
is done well enough for us to say definitively we know the places that are appropriate and there are no others, or in New England?
There is an organization, which is actually founded by a New Englander, Jamie Beard. She lives in the Boston area, and she is like the geothermal guru. She got a lot of these startups to be created by bugging oil and gas executives until they retired and joined the green side. Her nonprofit project Inner Space has partnered with Google to create a Google Earth thing of all the information, and not all, they're still adding things, but a lot of the information that you might want if you're thinking about doing geothermal, including estimates of heat at depth, including a data set of actual well bores and what temperature they reached at what depth. Here's the link to that. There are two different versions. One is like more geologic data, and one is the techno-economic, like on this site, if you put in different parameters, what could you expect to generate? It's very technical. I'm not necessarily suggesting that that will make sense to anyone coming at it with no context of enhanced geothermal in technical detail, but you can get a sense that yes,
Okay,
there are other organizations. Stanford has also done an analysis of US heat at depth, and in places
I
where
guess
there are a lot of wells, it's pretty confident. And
I'm sorry. So I guess you extrapolate from ground temp at X to estimate ground temp at Y, which is much deeper than X.
there are a lot of complicated methods that I'm not going to get into. I just had a conversation with the former state geologist of Massachusetts the other day, who did one of these for Massachusetts and maybe Connecticut, not to 10 kilometers depth, but they estimated in pretty detailed areas down to maybe 3 kilometers. They were looking for where could you do direct use heating. So instead of networked ground source heat pumps, just networked, we get hot water from the rock, which would be maybe 3 kilometer depth. And that study is somewhere from 10 years ago. Yeah.
Thank you,
Tom, and I'm gonna have to go in a couple minutes.
Thank you. Two questions. Can you refresh my memory as to what the estimated dollars per kilowatt hour was in New England for a typical plant?
Yeah, there's no typical for a first of a kind plant that when I've scoped this of what might it look like, the wholesale price might be something like 15 cents per kilowatt hour.
Okay. And the second question, how did you ever get involved in this, and what was it about this that said to you, this makes sense, and this is a new technology that can be developed and economically produced?
I've always been a climate activist, started when I was 11, and have mostly been focused on electricity generation. I thought originally I was going to go to college and invent some revolutionary solar cell that was way more efficient, and then basically was reminded that the sun doesn't shine at night. So I got into battery storage when I was state rep. I got some funding for doing battery testing stuff and trying to spur that innovation. And then once I wrote my book, which was me wrapping my head around the global picture of climate change, electricity generation is still a big chunk of emissions, and the need for baseload electricity, so either nuclear or geothermal, basically, clean baseload electricity, is still under discussed and under supported when all of the focus has gone into things that can't add up to 100% on their own by definition. And so I was interested in that. I ended up in this investing role, investing someone else's money at a significant scale in climate startups, including two of these geothermal companies, one on the drilling tech, one on the reservoir tech. And as well as other things, not just electricity generation, but those were kind of the top focus were the electricity ones. And I gave a TED talk based on my book that was focused just on like electricity generation, how much we need, how fast we need it. And so I'm excited by geothermal in that like we don't need to build a new factory to at large scale with a huge upfront investment for the factory to then start turning out the equipment to then, like with batteries or something, you'd have to do that. Geothermal, the factory's there. The factory is the oil and gas drilling workforce and existing rigs and everything. For the subsurface, the surface, we will need to build new factories for turbines, but there's enough of a supply chain already there to get us started. And so that's exciting. It's ready to go right now, unlike nuclear, which, I also do like a lot of the new nuclear designs, but they're just not, almost none of them are even theoretically ready to actually build in the next few years. And geothermal, we could actually build, for some price, you could actually have a power plant operating in 3 years anywhere in the world.
Wow.
So that's at kind of any scale. 10 megawatts, 1 gigawatt. Physically, you can do that. And it's just the issue really is the finance world can't get its act together to invest in this kind of thing. It's not just geothermal. It's a lot of climate solutions are capital intensive, a lot of upfront cost, especially to demonstrate and start scaling up, which is what's going to bring down the cost, and not a lot of ongoing cost. And so it just looks very different from like a methane power plant. So we need that.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I appreciate that. And thanks for sharing this with us.
Yeah. Okay. I think this is going to be the last question, Roy.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, you didn't say much about your company. I went on your website. It looks like you're a project developer. So I wonder if you could
Yes.
comment on that. As opposed to developing new technologies or manufacturing anything.
Yes. We're not one of these tech startups. We're a geothermal developer. So we're trying to find appropriate sites, find customers, sign contracts with the customers to serve them electricity, find funders, make a deal to get the project funding, and then partner with a supplier for the turbines and all of that, a supplier for the subsurface to use their reservoir design and help us manage the drilling. So we're pulling all the pieces together to make a project happen. And we've been mostly focused on Texas so far. I've started to look into doing things here, and we actually have a couple projects in other parts of the US that we're looking at now. And yeah, we started with like all clean baseload electricity, nuclear, geothermal, and long duration storage, and really focused in on geothermal as the thing that we could contribute to that's ready to go, that can make a big dent in emissions right now.
Right. And how many projects have you done so far? Have you started so far?
We have a few that we're scoping, but we're brand new. So
I see.
No one has built more than one of these in the world. As I say, there's one in Texas of one of the designs I said, and actually one small one and one larger scale one that's in construction in Utah for the other design that I mentioned for enhanced geothermal. So we need to scale it up because iteration is the way that this will come down in cost.
Understood. Thanks very much. Really appreciate that. And good luck.
Thank you, Solomon, so much.
Thank you all.
Very stimulating, and I'm sure everyone learned a lot.
I am going to go do my kids' bedtime now. Have a good night, everyone.
Bye-bye. If people have questions for Solomon, you could write to him directly, or you could put them in the chat and we could post them to Solomon and then send out the answers to the email list. If you're not on the email list for local energy advocates, put your email in the chat and Darcy can add you to the list so you'll get future announcements. And this recording will be on the on our website, and along with all the other really interesting recordings.